Good afternoon. I'm Arun Serafin, the Executive Director of the Emerging Technologies Institute at the National Defense Industrial Association. I want to thank all attendees for your support of NDIA and ETI and for joining us for today's webinar, Outcome-Oriented Approaches to Successful Software Acquisition, with our guests Sean Brady, Eileen Rubel, and Dr. Suzette Johnson. The session today will be moderated by Trey Hodgkins, the Cybersecurity Division Chair at NDIA. This event is co-hosted by NDIA Cybersecurity and Systems Engineering Divisions, as well as Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. Many of you will likely have heard about the recent Secretary of Defense's software memo entitled Directing Modern Software Acquisition to Maximize Lethality. Today's webinar will unpack some of the recent policy developments, like that memo, around software acquisition and explore how industry can think about improving program outcomes and working more closely with their government customer. This event is co-hosted by the Cybersecurity and Systems Engineering Division, is co-hosted by Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, who we have a strong partnership with and are working with on a number of programs, leveraging their great research work in areas like software acquisition. Now, some administrative items before we get started. All attendee lines are muted. If you have a question during the webinar, you can submit your question in the question box in the webinar panel. We'll do our best to get through all the questions during the Q&A portion of our session. We're recording today's webinar for any members unable to attend. We'll post the recording to our YouTube channel after the webinar. To introduce our moderator, Trey Hodgkins has been the chair of NDIA's Cybersecurity Division for 2 years, and that follows over 30 years of work in federal, state, and local government arenas, with almost half that time working on information technology in the public sector. Trey's one of the go-to gurus of IT acquisition policy in town, and he's always been a great source of information and counsel for me over the years as I struggle with some of these issues. So with that, Trey, you're going to be a great moderator. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Arun. I appreciate the opportunity to moderate our session this afternoon titled Outcome-Oriented Approaches to Successful Software Acquisitions. I'm pleased to have some exceptional panelists join me, and I'll get to them in a minute. But to table set our conversation this afternoon, I want to point to the Secretary of Defense's memorandum of March the 6th, Directing Modern Software Acquisition to Maximize Lethality. That's sort of at the root of what we're going to be talking about today. He talked about in his memorandum that software is at the core of every weapon and supporting system we field. I've been saying this for years, that the boots don't hit the ground, the planes don't fly, the ships don't sail, and the satellites don't work without software. But the department is shifting its acquisition policies, particularly around software, so that they can be more effective and do it more rapidly. The memo mandates that all components, business and otherwise, must adopt the software acquisition pathway as the preferred pathway for software development components of business and weapon systems programs at DoD. So that's a pretty broad scope. So we're talking about virtually everything that they deploy. It also requires, the memorandum also points to realigning contracting strategies to use primarily commercial solutions openings, or you probably will see them use the acronym CSO, or other transactions authorities, OTAs, which we've had a lot of conversation about over the last 5+ years. And the department and other agencies shift to using that instead of FAR-based transactions. The memo directs that CSO and OTA are the default solicitation and award approaches for acquiring capabilities under the pathway. And a few concepts the Secretary identified for this initiative that help us understand where we're going with this. One is to have a viable software acquisition pathway that enables the department to stay ahead of our adversaries when we're talking about enabling capabilities and mission with software. Right now, the process we have, if we stick with this, it's too slow, it takes too long, and our adversaries are not following a similar pathway and can advance ahead of us. The other initiative that the Secretary identified is that he wants to expose in a more rapid fashion, a more effective and broader fashion, traditional software programs to non-traditional and commercial software developers, and conversely, lower the barriers for those same types of potential defense industrial base participants so they can get in the market and deliver their capabilities more rapidly to the warfighter, leading to that maximizing lethality. And a couple of other important elements, certainly for what we focus on at NDIA and the cyber division, cybersecurity and program security have to be baked in the beginning. We don't always see that in software, and we certainly don't always see that in the outcome. So that's important to know. And then intellectual property rights, which is a huge question across acquisition in the government, those have to be addressed at program inception. So with those two final thoughts, and I'll point to this is moving very rapidly. So the Secretary's memorandum came out on March 6th. The Department CIO has already issued a software modernization implementation plan, which is an update for 25-26. If you haven't read that, I would point you to that as a document to elaborate on what we're talking about. So let me get into our other panelists here. First joining us from the department is Mr. Sean Brady, who is the Director of Software Acquisition and the DoD Software Cadre and the Deputy Director for Joint Interoperability within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Mr. Brady has led the development and implementation of the software acquisition pathway and the policy related to that, as well as the SecDef's software acquisition modernization initiative. So he is at the center of all these activities we're going to talk about today. He leads DoD's software acquisition program acceleration and process reforms. He's championed DoD's first API strategy and leads initiatives to improve business conditions for new entrants. Our second panelist will be Dr. Suzette Johnson, who, like me, is a chair for one of the divisions at NDIA. She chairs the NDIA Systems Engineering Division. Her regular role is at Northrop Grumman's Space Systems Sector, where she is a Northrop Grumman Fellow and Emeritus Technical Fellow. She is a certified Agile Enterprise Coach and a government-scaled Agile Program Consultant Trainer, and she has interest and passion for driving lean and Agile software adoption to achieve better mission outcomes. So right at the heart, again, of what we're speaking to today. She has supported more than 100 Northrop Grumman internal, federal, and DoD programs domestically and internationally, and supported their transition and maturation to lean Agile principles and engineering practices. She's co-authored multiple papers and a book on lean, Agile, DevOps, and digital capabilities being expanded into cyber physical systems. And lastly, I want to welcome Eileen Rubel, who is the Technical Director of the Transforming Software Acquisition Practice and Policy Director, that is a mouthful, at Carnegie Mellon's Software Engineering Institute in Pittsburgh. She is responsible for coordinating the strategic planning and technical acquisition of the SEI's initiatives to power bolder, faster, and more adaptive acquisition, modernization, and sustainment of software-enabled capability. She's been there for 21 years, and she's advised numerous DoD programs, and it offers advice and assistance on software-related issues in several different roles. With that, I'm going to note that these will be available to those who want to dig in deeper to our panelists' backgrounds as part of the materials that become available at the end of the program. And I want to turn it over to Mr. Sean Brady to start us off and talk to us about the pathway and where the department is going. Sean, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Hey Trey, I don't think Sean's work is working via Zoom. He dialed in through his phone. Can you please elevate him as a panelist? Give you the phone number.
The NDIA folks are on the line. Well, we're getting Sean mic'd in. Why don't we jump to set? I don't know how long that may take. And want to keep moving. So Suzette, if I could turn to you and ask you to share with us um, your perspectives. Is that what we want to do, Arun? NDIA team?
Yeah, that's fine, Suzette. Can you start? We may not see your slide until it flips to it, though.
Sure, I can certainly do that. So for a sound check, can you hear me okay?
All good.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and get started on our conversation. So first of all, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be with these amazing panelists as we talk about an area that is so critical to our defense community, and that is delivering outcomes, and more specifically, delivering outcomes at the speed of relevance. So to achieve accelerated delivery, there are several actions and practices that we need to consider. And I imagine, based on who I see on the call, I know actually some of you, that these actions are going to resonate with you, and you're already doing many of these practices and recommendations already. So that's great. And we're going to continue to build off of that. So beginning with focusing on when we develop a solution, right? We want to always begin with understanding the problem we're trying to solve. And some people refer to this as beginning with the end in mind, and this is critical because in today's rapidly evolving landscape, not only do we want to understand the objective or the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, but we also need to be able to rapidly adapt to the change. And this sometimes, because of the defense community and the missions that we're after, can actually be the difference between success and failure. So being outcome focused means ensuring that actions directly contribute to the mission's vision and goals and delivering tangible results. So this focuses our efforts on creating solutions that are not only effective, but also timely. And I have actually seen this in action where teams are very clear on the outcomes they need to achieve. This provided value not only in understanding what was needed in the solution, but also made it very clear what the priorities were. And then we could align that around a roadmap, around MVPs, and around a backlog. That enabled us to actually tie strategy to execution. And this approach reduced interruptions because we knew what we always wanted to focus on, and that became a priority towards those outcomes. And the important thing is it focuses on delivering outcomes versus getting every story done in the backlog. Getting every story in the backlog might be important if that's helping us to achieve that outcome faster. So we're always staying focused on that. So to do that, we need to adopt modern ways of working, which means embracing agility. And this focus is not just on iterations with regular feedback. That is absolutely important. We want that feedback. But to enable agility in short iterations also requires systems agility. And that's where things like modular architectures that allow us to rapidly adapt to change can reduce the dependencies, can increase team autonomy. Then there's also the practice of automation, right? Improves both speed and efficiency because you could be running thousands of tests regularly, and that isn't able to sustain manual. Not that you might still have a place for some manual testing, but the importance of automation for speed, agility, and built-in quality is key. And of course, being user-centric, and that is ensuring that our solutions meet the needs for the end users. That's the relevance part of delivering value at the speed of relevance. So what do we need to do that? Well, we need the right infrastructure and tools. That's paramount for enabling the speed of delivery. We need to have the integrated tools, seamless collaboration across various stages of development and deployment, a robust CI/CD pipeline, and also then requires a level of investment to make sure we have the right tools and that we are maintaining those tools and keeping it up to date. And that is also ensuring that the stakeholders that we need involved also have access to these tools, which is sometimes easier said than actually implemented. It can be a challenge, especially when having to work across different environments and different levels of security. The heart of all this, of course, is the people, right? They are the heart of everything that we do. And to succeed, we need to make sure that they have the skills that they need and that they are empowered to deliver at the speed of relevance, that they are able to have a shared understanding of the modern practices, right? And that comes into play so important as we are defining our strategy, as ensuring what are the practices that we are going to apply within our program with our stakeholders, and ensuring the people have the skills needed to implement the tools and the processes. And that ties it all together, right? The people, the process, and the tools that work together to actually deliver that value. And of course, continuously improving, because continuous improvement is achieved by diligently measuring our progress, taking a data-driven approach so that we can gain insights not only into the progress towards an outcome, but also understanding the system, the health of the system, the complexity of the system. And we continuously take that data and feed it into this iterative planning cycle so that we're continuously improving the solution as we are going through and developing that solution for our users. And this helps us understand progress towards the desired outcome. So how does this happen? Well, a lot of the practices that I've just talked about have been in play for a long time, for probably well over 10 years for some of you. And we want now to ensure that we have the right acquisition framework that actually enables us more easily to adopt all these great things, these tools and techniques that we know are so important in the software world, and that will help us achieve the mission and program objectives that we're looking for. So specifically, right, that takes us to the heart of what we're talking about today, which is the software acquisition pathway as an enabler for everything that I just highlighted, right? So circling all the way back to what I started with is that that being outcome focused means delivering outcomes at the speed of relevance, but that requires a holistic approach. That is everything from beginning with the end in mind and understanding the outcome that we're trying to achieve and the mission needs, all the way through continuously measuring and improving how we are performing and delivering that value. So the software acquisition framework, of course, leverages these practices with the goal of accelerating the delivery of that value. So I'm going to stop there, and I guess we'll see. Trey, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and you can tell us where we're going to proceed next. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzette. Yeah, I think we've resolved Sean's audio issues. He's able to join us on a call. We're going to jump back to Sean, and I'll ask the team to go back to his beginning slide in the presentation. And Sean, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Sorry, we've had some audio issues. We appreciate you being here to share, what you've been working on, and tell us, what we need to begin to understand about these revolutions around software at DoD. And I think you're muted, Sean.
I think I'm unmuted. Do you have me now, Trey?
There you go. We got you. Great. Thanks for joining us again.
All right. I appreciate that. Thanks for everyone's agility and being adaptive here on the fly. And I actually think what Suzette presented is a nice setup here. But first, thanks so much to Arun and Trey for hosting this. I'm excited to partner again with Suzette and Eileen today. Really exciting time. I think, Trey, you teed it up. It's as good a time for the defense software community as we've seen. You're talking about a Secretary of Defense who's leading off with acquisition reform as a priority, and right out of the gate, one of the first policy directives is, or actually the first policy directive, I believe, is showing, starting us off with modernizing software acquisition. So it is my top priority to lead the implementation of this important memo, along with our partners at DIA and the services and everyone really. You mentioned the software modernization senior steering group and the software modernization strategy and I-plan, and they will be an integral part of this as well. But the big thing up front is that our goal is to reform DoD acquisition. We want it to be commercial first, software centric, less bureaucratic, and more responsive to the warfighter. So if we can go to the next slide, I think this is going to tie in nicely to your opening statements and what Suzette was getting at in terms of how we want to proceed with modern software practices. Really, the software acquisition pathway is the only place the practices that Suzette was talking about are ingrained in policy. It is mandated to use DevSecOps and modern software practices, including all the people, processes, and tools in the software acquisition pathway. So that's going to lead to a nice contrast here. But I thought before we jumped into what the commander's intent for Secretary Hegseth is in terms of that memo and amplify some of the things that Trey started is, first, I think it's important to understand how we got here today in terms of software acquisition modernization. That will put this into context on why we need to change and do business very differently. So we're going to start on the left side. Now, personally, in this DoD software acquisition journey, I've been a part of this journey going back this entire ride here, so it's personally been very rewarding to see this. But starting on that left side is what I call the urgency stack, where we're pushing for change. And then we'll make our way over through the launching of the software pathway, all the way over to the historic memo from Secretary Hegseth. But the first, at the top left there, really software acquisition and development in DoD, as Arun knows, and many of you know, was essentially deemed a national security crisis. So going back to 2015 all the way through 2019, what we saw was a constant parade of major defense acquisition program software failures that were heading to the Defense Acquisition Board. And Mr. Kendall was there. I certainly was there as the director of software engineering at the time and had responsibility for providing the analyses on all of these spectacular software failures. And so with that parade, OSD initiated a Defense Science Board and Defense Innovation Board study to end that industrial age type of acquisition for software and replace it with something modern. As I stated, I actually drove that Defense Science Board study. That was the first domino, and I think it offers a scathing assessment. If you can read that at the very top, it's talking about the anti-patterns we don't want to see. Suzette talked about the things we need to have. This is really what we can't have and what we were seeing, right? So the Defense Science Board and Defense Innovation Board brought folks from private industry, commercial software companies, including top 10 market caps, to say, what's going on in DoD versus how we do business? And it says, hey, DoD uses techniques and processes from the 70s and 90s. Now imagine if you're in the private sector today in the 21st century and you're trying to compete and survive in a Darwinian marketplace using those type of processes. There's absolutely no way you would survive. So that Defense Science Board was very important, that study on software acquisition. Then the Defense Innovation Board study led by Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time. It piled on and it agreed. Ultimately, SecDef sent these over to Congress, which were ultimately all those recommendations accepted and turned into law, including that software pathway. But if you move down that stack, Congress has had a visceral reaction to the problems in the Department for software, again, amounting to a national security crisis. If you look at it, any given 5-year rolling window, you have 20 NDIA provisions saying you got to do things different. So that's kind of key. And then, of course, moving down the stack, it's really the mission and the connected fight. We're not just going fast for its sake. We're not just changing, because we don't like old school software processes. The mission is the key driver here. We need to make decisions at speed and scale. We need to deliver combined effects and close kill chains faster than our adversaries. And in that construct, you're talking about a dynamic fight where you're going to build, fight, learn, and adapt. So we got to have the ability to rapidly change our systems and field new software, and business as usual is not going to support that. So really on that left side, that is all the bow wave of compelling change coming at the department. And that's where in 2020, basically fiscal year 21, we launched that software acquisition pathway, and in record time. We did it 1 year ahead of congressional expectation. And that turned out to be important because it gave us an additional year to create more guidance, training, and additional sets and reps by the services to familiarize themselves with this process. So that was really notable in getting that out very quickly. So over those 4 years leading up to the memo, we're talking about a very lean team in my shop executing to operate the software pathway with a lean startup mindset where we're always doing outreach. We're constantly looking at adjacent processes to reshape and reform, because it's not just about the material acquisition approach, it's also those other adjacent functional policies and adjacent processes for the total defense acquisition system that we need to look at and optimize all those business conditions. And so that's really what we have at the bottom there. So with the launch of the pathway in FY21, basically every fiscal year thereafter, we attacked a different policy to try to make it aligned with the speed of the software pathway, which requires planning phases in about 6 months or less. And of course, in execution, what's notable about the software pathways, you must deliver within 6 months or less. So that's the expectation. So if you look at FY21 on the bottom there, we started off by teaming with the joint staff to say, we need a new JSIDS process, an expedited process. We teamed up with the J8 there, and we cut that down to a 40-day timeline to support rapid validation, because we don't have time for a 1 to 2 year process to figure out if this is the thing we're going to validate or not. You'll have lost the opportunity at that point. If it was private sector, first of all, you would need to be able to deploy capital within an 18-month runway and determine if you can take advantage of a market opportunity, gain first mover advantage. So those kinds of timelines don't work. And that's an example of where we lean out a process. And as you proceed along, there's other aspects that we leaned out. We created an API strategy so we can support things like CJAD C2. We're going to mandate that in the software pathway. We created a defense business subpath because there are unique compliance needs that are peculiar to systems designated as defense business systems. Typically, those would go through what was called a BCAC process. We went through the serial authority to proceed. Well, we said, hey, this is software, this is 21st century. How do we make a subpath while still meeting compliance and allowing more systems to access the benefits of the pathway? We worked with the CAPE. We cut down a process that was 210 days to only now 120 days to create an independent cost estimate. Again, this is all supporting that modern software speed. And then moving forward, this all led up to setting the conditions and the policy foundations where we can now grow this beyond the 86 programs. And what's notable in that stand chart is that we basically have equal foot traffic across the services and components, an intense amount of adoption from folks like SOCOM that have acquisition authority, so shouldn't be surprised, as their ethos is to always be innovating, but also the fourth estate. So that says, hey, we have enough adoption, folks are familiar with the pathway, we've got 4 years of building up our guidance, and that's where the secretary said, all right, this is the way we should be doing business, and now let's scale it. There's more work to be done. We're going to get after other aspects, but I would just head to the next slide, and that's going to be really just to reiterate what Trey was talking about. So what is the intent here? We talked about at the beginning, commercial first, less bureaucratic, more responsive to the warfighter, and software-centric. The two mission drivers are, number one, mission, and we already talked about that. This is an era of software-defined warfare. So all of our combat support and weapon systems, as Trey talked about, they're driven by software, their functionality. It's the software, though, that allows us to adapt these systems in the face of changing threats, changing priorities, technology opportunities, and that's really critical. But the second piece is commercial innovation. Commercial industry is absolutely driving innovation in the space. So innovation cycles in the private sector to go from an idea to a product those are measured in days and weeks, especially with cyber and AI. That's the product life cycle and opportunity these days. It's not measured in years like we're used to. And that's part of all the reasons why we have to change and have a more adaptive, more responsive acquisition system. But really, it's that commercial innovation. We need to take advantage of commercial industry's innovative solutions. And by the way, also their talent. So Suzette talked about the people, processes, and tools. Well, born digital companies know those well. That's their core competency. They know how to execute, and that's what we want to take advantage of. But the bottom line is, this is why the DoD is directing the software pathway and companion contracting, innovative contracting practices as the default way of doing business, right? It's the software pathway where we're building, measuring, and learning. I call it the lean startup. That's the process. Through the delivery of those MVP products, we have intense warfighter involvement. That's prioritizing our backlogs. That's giving feedback on the product to make sure we're not wasting time delivering something that's not meeting a need. And it mandates, as we talked about, those software development processes like DevSecOps to automate the build, test, and release process. The secret weapon of the software pathway that we've got to reinvigorate is the value assessment. That tells us if we should continue building, or we should pivot from what we're doing in terms of both what and how we're building. And then lastly, the innovative contracting piece, right? Companion to that software pathway that's built for this type of business model, those innovative contracting strategies like CSOs and OTs, those are lowering barriers to entry, faster and more flexible solicitation and award approaches, and that's going to speed up our access to these non-traditional players and the cutting edge tech for our warfighters. So that's the intent, Trey and company. That's the journey, how we got here. And we want to put these two pieces together to get our warfighters the most innovative solutions. Back over to you, Trey.
Thanks, Sean. That was a great overview and a little history there on what we should anticipate. I'd like to bring in our final, but certainly not least, panelist, Eileen with SEI in Pittsburgh. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to your comments to round out what we're going to talk about.
Thanks so much, Trey. If you want to throw Suzette's slide back up, when Suzette and I were chatting this weekend, I realized that all I was going to do was produce a slide that looked pretty much just like this. So rather than have everybody have to look at it twice, I want to thank Arun and everybody at NDIA for pulling this together. Sean and Suzette and I was reflecting on the more than a decade now that the three of us have been sharing stages and working together across the community in working groups, in different kinds of collaborative environments to really try to help the department pursue its goals of really accelerating the delivery of software-enabled capability to the warfighter in a sustainable and adaptable way. For those in the community who aren't familiar with the SDI, just real quick to contextualize where I'm coming from, we are a federally funded research and development center. We're DoD's software R&D FFRDC, and we were chartered to advance software engineering as a national strategic advantage. And so on my team, we do a lot of work to integrate data-driven insights and software engineering research and acquisition science and practice to help the department scale capability in the workforce and accelerate the adoption of commercial and scientific innovation. As Sean talked about earlier, right? Software is the gunpowder of the 21st century. And we used to say, you know, software is even in the bullets, and now we're even beyond that. And so when I think about how do you tell people, you know, best practices for focusing on successful software acquisition and programs, one of the things we always talk about is the imperative for software acquisition professionals to understand that working software, first and foremost, is the measure of success aligned with mission outcomes. And at the risk of repeating things that my esteemed colleagues have said, that alignment to a focus on outcomes throughout the stakeholders in programs is absolutely critical. We used to talk in programs a lot about wanting outputs, specific widgets or specific components, and really shifting the conversation to talking about outcomes and capabilities is what helps us to really take advantage of the leading work in the commercial industrial base and the defense industrial base, and helps us to be creative and flexible about how we get to the delivery of those capabilities quickly. That outcome-oriented focus has to permeate through everything that we're talking about in terms of product or capability design, and down into contracting and incentive strategies for how we communicate with our defense industrial base partners, how we establish the business and financial models by which our acquisition programs operate. And it's important to understand that all of those different stakeholders deliver value to their organizations in different ways. And so the more we consistently align on and communicate about the strategy and the desired outcomes in programs, which include just as much of the things we're not doing as the things we are doing, right? A good strategy tells you what to say yes to, what to pivot to, just as much as it tells you what to say no to and what to pivot away from. But it's important that we're aligned across all of those stakeholders, and that we're inclusive of our commercial partners and our defense industry partners right from the start. And if we have everybody focused on those outcomes, that's what drives us toward making decisions that are consistently in support of mission value. Suzette talked about backlogs, right? And those of us who've come up in agile software development, right? We talk about backlogs aren't a promise that something's going to get done, but it's definitely a sign that something won't get done if it's not in those backlogs. And having a consistent strategy that's aligned to outcomes and able to adapt and pivot based on changing conditions helps us manage through all of that, and make all of the decisions that we need to make in executing a program to deliver capability, so that we're meeting the need by getting things in the right place to the right person and delivering the right capability consistently. I'm not going to go through all of Suzette's pieces line by line, but my next point is to really think about, she uses the phrasing about adopting modern ways of working. I try to talk about continuous everything. Agility is not just something that software organizations do. It's not just Scrum or safe release trains or even DevSecOps, but it's really a continuous way of thinking. The great long distance runner Steve Prefontaine used to talk about slow is smooth and smooth is fast, and really fine tuning to a continuous decision-making model where we have decisions happening where information lives, where we are automating to the greatest extent possible, align with those priorities and decisions. That makes everything smooth, and that's what makes it fast. And it's important to talk about continuous behavior and modern ways of working, not just in the software parts of what we're doing, not just in the production of software or the test of software or the build and deploy, but also in the business processes, in program offices, and in all our supporting functions. We can always be focusing on what is the information we really need in order to make decisions, and what can we automate and streamline. Automation in executing business functions and business decision-making really is just as important as automation and continuity in the development enterprises. And in fact, if we're only focusing on continuous delivery and automation in the production of software, then we're still only getting to local optimization instead of optimization of the entire ecosystem. The third thing that I really want to talk about, and I'll probably spend more time on, is that we have to be measuring what matters in order to enable us to make the decisions we need to make. And that threads through accountability toward those consistently communicated outcomes and that consistently communicated strategy. There can be a historic tendency to think about metrics as something that I report up to higher headquarters to tell people what I'm doing. And we really need to think about what is the data that we need every day to do our jobs, to make the decisions about the program, to know that software development and capability development is proceeding in a timely manner to meet the tempo of need for the warfighter, that we are building quality product, and that it is meeting the needs of our users. And we need to really link that all the way back to that very first, the user agreement that we talk about in the software pathway, that handshake between the acquirer and the user community about what really constitutes, that gets us to what really constitutes mission value. And we need to make sure that we're building, when we're talking about measuring how we're doing on programs for programmatic insight as well as oversight, we need to be ensuring that those feedback loops run all the way from things like flow metrics in the software development organization and quality metrics, all the way through to are we deploying software at a frequency that is consistent with the user need and their ability to consume, but also are we putting what's valuable into the hands of users and explicitly building in, linking, and automating those feedback loops. We should never fall into the trap of managing programs or designing them to metrics. Metrics provide a spotlight. They shine a light on how we're doing in service to our goals, but they shouldn't be what compels the program, except insofar as the metric specifically communicates a mission outcome. And so as we're talking about taking outcome-oriented approaches and really lining up strategies and seeking adaptability and flexibility and more rapid delivery, I want to make sure that I leave folks with, when we talk about measurement and metrics and data collection, really positioning the use of data as a strategic asset in acquisition programs to inform decision-making at all levels. Just because you can count something doesn't mean the thing counts, and really focusing on what are the questions I need to ask to know that I'm putting the right thing in the hand of the right user consistently and that it is valuable to them. The best metrics for programs, the best data is the data that we use every day to make decisions, as opposed to something that we're just going to put on a shelf somewhere. And so when we're communicating up and down at various levels of the organization, the program, the PEO, even up to ANS with the software pathway health metrics, that we're understanding how we're using that data to support everyday decision making, and then connecting that to mission value. That really gets us there for validating that the practices that we are employing and technologies that we are employing are delivering for users. And the one other thing that I will say as I'm mindful of the clock is that if we're talking about absolute best practices, I will say never rely on a single metric in a program, because to paraphrase a leader in the field, if you're only relying on one metric, it doesn't matter what it is, I guarantee that you're wrong. All of these things, all the information that we have about how we develop, how we build, and how we deploy software and how our users experience it, all those things go together in a context to communicate about progress, quality, and mission delivery. And so we need to keep that in mind in order to be really making informed, data-driven decisions at the speed of need. And now I know I'm certain we have questions coming in from our viewers out there in internet land. So I will cede the floor back to Trey. Thanks so much, Trey.
Thank you. So Sean, I wanted to ask a follow-up question. It's in my experience, this is probably unprecedented leadership support for a change that is so substantially broad in scope and altering in the context of how we do things. What is the department doing? What are you doing to drive that down, into the services and out into the industrial base to really have the directive take hold? And how are we going to do that?
Can you hear me okay, Trey?
You're good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, that's it. I think we have the full backing from the Secretary of Defense down to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who put a letter out to the force that said, hey, we're empathetic that this is a cultural shift and that we're going to need to provide you with tools, resources, training, and guidance really across all echelons of the acquisition formation. So I think we have great top cover to then use that empowerment to drive it into execution through an implementation plan that we're working right now. But I think in terms of the broader context, if you go back to the chart I was presenting before about that, that sand chart and all the different reforms we were getting after, I think those are really key, and I'll hit on those. But before I do that, I think making the software acquisition pathway more accessible is critical. Certainly from Congress, we're hearing, hey, we know that there's a natural affinity for command and control and decision support systems, intel, cyber, but we actually want to see more business systems and we want to see more weapons adopting the software pathway. So for us, we have 3 subpaths that make the software pathway more accessible. 2 of them were required by the Section 800 law, which is that application pathway, and that's where those more cloud native type capabilities dominate our software pathway population. Then we also have an embedded pathway for weapon systems that has sensitivity to the nuances associated with delivering with cyber physical dependencies. And we allow for some of those nuances to be handled by allowing you to deploy to operationally representative environments instead of going directly out into production as is required by law. So I think those are key. We did launch that 3rd defense business subpath that addresses those unique compliance areas, but I do think we need to step up the weapons piece. But bottom line is pretty much any system type can take advantage of the software acquisition pathway, and we're working on another subpath to handle the nuances of AI type compliance. So that's also in the work. But I think in terms of enabling the workforce and the services, we talked about the joint staff piece. That can become the bottleneck if you have a 2-year requirement process up front. But also the CAPE piece, right? We have to make sure that we can estimate this. But in terms of the weapons support, which is where Congress wants to see us go, and actually, right, as we have more autonomous systems going into the fight, and that's a huge emphasis area, we're supporting that with this Weapons Ignite toolkit. There are unique challenges and specialty certifications associated with weapons that you have to meet before fielding that go beyond ATOs. So cybersecurity and ATOs are typically looked at, hey, this is the big bottleneck, but there's actually airworthiness, nuke surety, flight safety, weapon safety, DO-178 Charlie. So all of those types of things can actually become new development and delivery bottlenecks. So we're creating a toolkit that gives you best practices that are gleaned from forward-leaning programs, but also commercial industry examples like SpaceX that are shifting those processes into an automated fashion, right? And it's also going to help program managers figure out, how do I actually apply the software pathway in a weapons context? Do I have to combine it with other pathways that are more hardware centric, right? Or can I actually wholesale just use the software pathway for, say, small UAS, where perhaps I have pre-built hardware, since the software pathway allows you to indeed acquire commodity hardware or mature hardware or hardware that doesn't have a high risk associated with it, where it's driving risk on the program. I think the other way we're helping the services is from that cybersecurity standpoint, right? We know that the SWIFT memo, software fast track, is out, and we're looking at ways we can complement our partners at CIO to make sure we're supportive of that effort to enhance cybersecurity posture and make the ATO process and getting commercial solutions into production environments faster. T&E is a big piece, but I also think the budgeting piece is a challenge. So we're working on a flexible funding task force that is coming up with courses of action that Congress can consider for us to not have different appropriations be the cause of why we can't deploy capabilities or develop capabilities to the warfighter, or just make planning very difficult. So we have the BA-8 pilots that have been ongoing for a while now, but we want to bring those to a meaningful and impactful conclusion and offer up the possibility that, hey, what if we just had consistent interpretation of the financial management regulation in what we can do with whatever funding appropriation we're provided? Because if you look at sustainment and you think about the old 12207 software engineering standard, right, there's 4 ways you can do maintenance: preventative, perfective, corrective, and adaptive. Adaptive means I should be able to evolve the functionality here. So we want to just put out, in this modern software is never done era, possibilities for programs not to be hampered by that piece. So I think there's a lot that we're doing there. And of course, in terms of the defense industrial base, I think this push to CSOs and OTs is really the key piece that we're using to help drive more engagement with those non-traditional players getting involved with larger scale acquisition. Back over to you, Trey.
Thanks, Sean. We have a lot of great questions coming in, and so our panelists have agreed we're going to shift to trying to get to some answers on some of those. I want to start with Suzette. You mentioned modularity, and as a mechanism to perhaps facilitate this in places like weapons platforms. How can we make sure that the hardware that the software is operating keeps pace with and evolves and modernizes with the software? How do we make sure that's happening going forward, and how do we make that successful?
Yeah, thank you. I'm also kind of looking at those questions. So that's a good question, because when we're talking about building software and building that software for weapon systems, there are obviously, or often, hardware, it's a hardware software integration that comes into play. And that's partly where that road mapping comes into play. So I am assuming the hardware would be using possibly a different acquisition model, or the software, if they're taking advantage of the software pathway. However, as part of the strategy for implementing the software pathway also means defining that roadmap. And as you're defining the roadmap for software towards outcomes, there would need to be that alignment to some degree of what is hardware doing and where are the needed integration points. At what time does the hardware and software need to come together? And part of that is also understanding the state of your product. Are you just building the system, or is there already a system in production and you're just making updates? All of these things are different variables that come into play that needs to be considered as part of the approach. And what's interesting is it will take coordination between both the kind of infrastructure and hardware components with the people that are planning the software to have that level of collaboration so that we can deliver the desired outcomes or ensure that we are ready for the right testing, because in cyber physical systems, some testing can be very expensive before it gets released into operations. So there's several things to consider, and context matters and how you would approach that. And of course, the modularity comes into play because I've seen, when we talk about sometimes agility, and I've seen where teams are trying to iterate and deliver faster. And when you get to the heart of the matter, it's not that they're not planning well. And sometimes it's not even that they weren't having clear objectives. It was really understanding the architecture, and has the architecture been decoupled enough or modularized in a way that teams can work more autonomously, but they still need to be aligned around the expected delivery on those outcomes. I'm not sure if that answers what the person had in mind. If not, maybe they can add another question for clarity. Or maybe Eileen or Sean have something to add to that.
I was going to say, Eileen and Sean, please jump in on any of these questions, or whoever I direct the question to, feel free to jump in and elaborate. And I'll pause for a second to see if you had anything that either of you wanted to add to that answer about making the hardware and the software evolve in parallel. If not, I'll jump to one of the other. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah. So the only thing I would say is that commercial industry is looking at tools on how you can actually develop hardware in this manner and try to, so I believe software engineering is kind of pacing ahead of systems engineering. And because our innovation cycles are so fast, the actual tools and how you build are, I think you're going to see commercial companies pushing in that area. The other thing I would just say, because I thought Suzette nailed it, is that when it comes to the pace of hardware, there are forward-leaning programs that are trying to provide an agile process that matches the cadence of the software. So they're building on very mature hardware as it stands, but for those tech refresh pieces or any kind of non-commodity hardware, they want to reduce those cycles. We are going to capture those lessons learned in that package I referred to earlier as Weapons Ignite. That will probably be in a focus area of the Toolkit 2.0 on how we can provide for agile processes. And then the last, agile processes to match the software cadence. And then lastly, definitely we're seeing Congress asking to treat hardware programs, try to push them to adopt a lot of the software pathway principles and practices and spread those best practices across the rest of the acquisition framework. That's the only thing I would add, is that there's going to be some guidance coming out, but I thought Suzette nailed it.
Great. I'm going to take one of the next ones quickly and point to something Sean mentioned about ATOs. We had a question about whether or not SBOM, software bill of materials, and of course that may get into hardware bill of materials in conjunction with a software bill of materials or even a digital bill of materials. The answer is yes. The other transaction authority or the CSO may require the person developing the software to demonstrate through an SBOM or other means how they built in the security that the department is expecting. I'll also point to the CISO, excuse me, the DoD CISO, CIO's office has issued a new program called SWIFT, which intends to modernize and accelerate the authority to operate process for software. If you haven't taken a look at that, I would point you to statements Ms. Arrington has made, but there'll be 12 evaluation criteria, one of which is you will have to turn in a software bill of material to get an ATO. So you might take a look at that to dive deeper into where an SBOM might be needed. The next question I will hope to turn to Eileen for was about how do the traditional testing processes need to be evolved and modernized and modified to improve the adoption of commercial best practices?
Thanks, Trey. And I will invite Suzette and Sean, of course, to weigh in. We've been doing a lot of work in this area over the years, and I think a core underpinning when we talk about how do we need to reimagine developmental and operational test comes back to that idea of continuous everything and treating test over throughout the life cycle as kind of a campaign of learning, where we are systematically designing the way that we collect evidence throughout different test activities, right? Test activities collect information for us that then we use in the evaluation of the product in some way, both in DT and OT, right? And so being deliberate upfront as we are building systems about the data that we are collecting from test events and how it fits into the decision-making or evaluation processes that we need to put in place to sign off on a system, that's really key. And then getting to looking at any given point where we're saying, okay, we have a test event, we have an evaluation decision to make, looking at what is the set of evidence that we have that we have already collected from other test activities, and understanding how well does that support the decision making that I need to be doing right now, or the evaluation that I need to be doing right now, and what's the delta of the data that I need to collect from another test activity or sequence of activities in order to support the decision making. There's a lot of work going on across the department, and things like risk acceptance level of test, and things like tiered levels of assurance, variable trust models, and those ideas about continuously building a body of evidence and then understanding what and how that supports an overall structure of decision making is really important. And then, of course, all of the test automation and reuse that comes with modern software engineering concepts undergirds all of that. And I'll stop there and see if anybody else wants to weigh in.
Hey, that
Okay.
was great. I would just put another plug that all the great best practices that Eileen just talked about, if you go on our software acquisition pathway website, you'll find our test strategy template. GAO has found that. We've discussed it with them, and there's another good example of all the things that Eileen talked about are in a compression algorithm in the software acquisition pathway, either in our guidance or in our templates. But I would encourage folks that if they looked on the software acquisition pathway website, you'll find that test strategy template, and you'll see all those great practices captured there. That's all I have as a plug there for some of our materials.
Great, thank you. This actually, the next question will be for you, Sean. It's one that I think you're the only one who can answer. It's great that you know, this concept of the pathway has a congressional directive behind it, but you know, innovation can be expensive. And if you're creating a dynamic where we're going to try, fail, and try again, how does DoD plan to track and manage their budgets in that context? And how do you keep, you know, the overseers satisfied that, you know, who are watching the dollars, that this is moving in the right direction?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We know that we need to encourage program managers and acquisition to take smart risk. And I think that's the lean startup mindset. If we remember, we started out talking about how the software acquisition pathway is the lean startup for DoD. So that's actually a risk reduction approach. So if I'm better to find out as early as possible if I'm delivering something productively that does not meet an unmet need, or to find out that I can't actually productively deliver. So the software pathway is going to expose that much earlier. You really have to have that ability. Your teams have to understand like what we started out with Suzette talking about, all those key principles. If your teams cannot operate together, if the government side of the house doesn't have the domain experts that are properly prioritizing those requirements and providing the timely feedback, Eileen talked about the user agreement, and they are bound to provide that feedback at key events and really persistently. So they need to understand how to operate in that context. And then, of course, on the vendor side, we have to, we're going to commercial software companies so that we understand we're bringing to folks who have that skill set, but we want to expose if we just can't get it right, and better to do that earlier than traditional DoD practices and processes. If you remember that journey we started out, all of those spectacular failures that ended up in the defense acquisition boardroom, we deprived ourselves of learning and understanding what the tech debt was, or if this system would even work, for years before we discovered we have to do things differently. So I think it's a smart question to ask. This is the innovation era. We have to stay ahead of the threat. And so the only way you can deal with a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment that we're facing and the rapid innovation cycles, it's proven that these commercial practices and approaches make the most sense. I know that Eileen said that there's no single metric, there's no God Higgs boson metric to rule them all, but the value assessment, that secret weapon of the software pathway. Are you delivering value to the warfighter? Let's start there. And then we can assess. It's kind of hard to do that. Return on investment. We don't have the same financial metrics that are standardized in publicly traded companies and other places. But that is the key and core. At least if we cannot deliver value, we should be pivoting. But the one place we don't want to head towards, and it's actually illegal, is earned value. So if EV is not going to be the way that we understand progress in terms of delivering value, we have modern metrics, which really go back towards Eileen's comment. The Software Pathway website has a whole set of product delivery metrics, modern metrics associated with DevSecOps that you'll find in the private sector, and then also product performance and value type metrics that your users and your developers will come to agreement upon to have an accurate real-time understanding, or as close to it, of if we're going off the rails or not. But I think Eileen will remember this, but actually Congress, going back to Section 874 Agile pilots back in the day, that you're not allowed to do EVM, it's against the law. And then later on, that was actually wholesale codified for all software acquisition. So it wouldn't be that. I'd encourage you to take a look on our website at the various different metrics you can bring to bear to understand if we're meeting cost and performance. Back over to you, Trey. Hope that answered the question.
Yes, thanks. So another question I wanted to tease out. Some certification authorities do not certify incrementally. And we'll wait until everything and all the functionality is in place, following the old waterfall software development structure. How do we change that culture and process? And how do we build in incremental evidence towards certification when that can be the pathway? And I'll just ask that of the panelists, and you can jump in if you have some thoughts.
I was trying to also follow your note about, hey, we can turn the cameras back on. I wanted to, I'm eager to hear from Suzette and Sean. I wanted to point out some of the really cool work that the Air Force did last year with reimagining how information moves in the airworthiness process. And so even though that doesn't certify incrementally, they got folks in a room and said, okay, let's really sit down and talk about the information needs as they move, as it moves from stage to stage, and how can we build the bodies of evidence to create the information, to put that information in hand, so that when we are at the point where we need to make an evaluation for certification, you have seen that body of evidence build over time. And I can't cite the timeframes on it, but there was a great presentation by somebody at SAF AQR at last year's NDIA System and Mission Engineering Conference, talking about how they did that work. And that's really, it's almost a business process re-engineering kind of activity where like-minded folks have to get in a room and say, okay, this is how we bring value, and these are the information needs that we have, and we match up your information needs to get it. What's the value that we both need from this, right? We want to be able to release things faster, and we also want to make sure, obviously, we have this sacred duty to make sure that we are delivering safe, suitable, and effective systems. But that idea of re-engineering the process and thinking about the information needs and how they build up, and having somebody on the other end of that handshake working together is really key. And there's a lot of talk about, I'll leave one other point, which is there's a lot of talk about how do we facilitate the automation of some of the analysis and data collection to support these certification processes. And that goal to automate in order to automate aspects in order to further expedite those things really roots fundamentally in re-engineer what are the information needs at every step of the way, so that everybody understands what is needed to make those decisions and what are the contexts in which they're made. And then once you have that, then you can get it, okay, well, how can I, as part of my development activities or whatever, how can I automate the development of some of those information needs to build those bodies of evidence over time? And I'll see if Suzette or Sean have anything to add there.
Hey, Eileen, I do. So, because I think it's really important, and I've seen it be effective when we can engage the people that certify our systems early in the process. And I'm also scanning the questions that are coming in from our audience. And one of the questions is talking about, how do we ensure that the people, and I would look more like some of these folks, right, or government people, along within the software pathway, I recall the product owners, and often that is a government person. So I'm curious about how are we getting the right people engaged and ensuring on the government side that we have the time necessary with them, or that they're getting what they need to be successful. Do you have any insight on that? Or Sean, maybe?
Yeah, I have a lot of insight on that recently, actually. So a strong product owner is absolutely critical. They have to understand the domain. They have to understand how to work on agile delivery teams. And a broken product owner is going to result in a trail of tears. We've seen it drive programs into the ground. I've seen it work well on a SOCOM program that will be in one of our vignettes from the 160th SOAR. Now, when you're talking about these types of warfighters, they have very discerning needs, and they are a tough customer. So they use the software pathway not only to adopt modern software development, but they empowered the end user from day zero. You really have to convince these folks, these demanding warfighters, that, hey, you should be involved, because they ultimately found out that their direct combat effectiveness and the risk to the operator in combat is going to be, combat effectiveness will be increased, and that operator risk is going to be reduced. So they saw the power of what happens when a capable development team, by the way, this is an example where we paired a new entrant that had never delivered software before, except to commercial automotive companies like BMW, and had understood how to work with these high-speed warfighters. But it was absolutely match made in heaven in terms of getting product that actually made a difference on a cadence in the fight and getting what they need from a non-traditional company. They actually use a commercial solution opening paired with another transaction to get access to the talent. But I think it's one of the best examples of what can go right when you have very determined folks who don't need a pep talk. Like, they're all in, the warfighters see as the pilots for mission planning, this is what's going to make the difference. Seen it in other cases, but where we've seen it not work has not been good. So I think you're absolutely right. You need to identify, ideally, a government product owner who has deep understanding of the domain. It should come from the warfighting community, to your question, Suzette. And they really need to understand the mission, obviously, so that we're not prioritizing the wrong requirements. And that's what we've seen happen before, or a general free-for-all where getting your needs into the backlog was kind of just unchecked and ad hoc, right? So if they're not involved in the value assessments, if they're not involved in continuously modifying a product, this whole thing is not going to work. That's the only way we buy down risk. And actually, in Indo-PACOM right now, one of the vanguard prototypes in the department is setting another example of a gold standard, where that warfighter every 2 weeks by the clock can count on these high-speed developers, again, new entrants, getting them what they need. And there's no daylight between development and warfighter, and really that product owner driving the backlog. So I think we need to put out some good examples, Suzette, because we're getting this question a lot. And so probably in the next year, that'll be a point of emphasis on our website. I hope that made sense and kind of addressed the challenge.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So Sean, I'll bring in the current hot buzzword of technology and point us toward AI. We have a question about what you can share on the development of the AI subpath for software acquisition pathway.
Yeah, sure. This always seems to get attention, even though it's in the development stages. People are kind of anticipating it. But the fact is, just as there's a lot of compliance and authorization and accreditation and certifications that you would need for a weapon system, there may be certifications that you also need to bring to bear on the safe and trustworthy use of autonomy, right? Safe and trustworthy development. And that has to be brought to bear. It can come in the form of executive orders. It can come in the form of potential AI risk management, NIST controls that are peculiar to AI. So what we're really trying to do is, for anything that is required to be different, we want to get acquisition AI ready. So we're in the development stages now. If you'd like to be a part of seeing a preview or part of the development team or contributing to it, please reach out and contact me. But we want to get ahead of any possible bureaucratic gates. This is an opportunity for cases where we're acquiring AI-enabled components or AI systems that we don't introduce anything that could possibly create new silos or slow down delivery, because this is the fastest pace. But we do have an AI subpath task force right now. We're partnered with CDAO and the services, and that's in development. We hope to get that out this year, and it will handle all the things, right? How is T&E different? How do I actually cost to train a model? What are the different data sources that I need? What if they're commercial? What if they're behind the fence and they're defense related? How do I cost for this? Explainable AI and trust. Those are keynotes, right? Training, doctrinal changes. What do I have to do as a PM that is nuanced and different, if anything? And that's where this is going to be a compression algorithm of those types of things. And it would be used in combination with the software pathway, right? So please reach out if you'd like to find out more about that or participate. Definitely getting industry perspective would be excellent, sure. That's the latest on that, Trey.
Thank you. So this is sort of a variation on the integration question, wondering about if software is developed on the pathway, who is responsible for integrating that into the platform or system that it's developed for, or is a component of?
It depends. That's my thought. I'll take a first shot, Eileen and Suzette. But again, I have to tell you, this is where Congress is pushing us, and this is where we need to be able to answer these questions consistently and at scale as we get more weapons into the software pathway. So I encourage you to look at Weapons Toolkit 1.0 on how you handle this. So I think in the case, we have two good examples. So the first ever DoD hybrid acquisition was Army Integrated Air and Missile Defense. That was a major defense acquisition program coupled with the software pathway. And then a little bit later, the second hybrid ever acquisition was the robotic combat vehicle in combination with the software acquisition pathway. And while the department may be going in a different direction in that case, the lessons learned and the approaches are, I believe, still very relevant on how you handle that. So you might be involved with, on the MTA program, sort of focus on that integration piece and the drivers. That's exactly right. So there should be some software integration potentially on that side that's peculiar to what you're integrating with. But the software acquisition pathway, in case of an autonomous vehicle like we're talking about, you might have the best of breed perception algorithm or navigation algorithm that you want to add that can be common potentially across a set of baselines. So I think when we went to SpaceX, there was like a common software baseline for 9 different configurations. Tesla, I believe, has the same approach, and you get that economies of scale. So I think that's really going to be important when we're talking about attritable warfare going forward, where we have like really sophisticated software solutions that are applied to different, increasingly lower cost hardware to support that dynamic type fight that we're talking about. But it's an excellent question. We've got to be able to put that message out, and Weapons Ignite is going to be the place for that. I don't know if anyone else had any other thoughts there, but would welcome any feedback on the Weapons Ignite toolkit to get that right. It's important.
So I wanted to try and get in two more questions, one for Suzette and one for Eileen, and Sean, of course, jump in wherever you have something to add. But Suzette, as a major player, of course, in the industrial base, how are you thinking about, and how do you see industry thinking about transitioning existing programs to incorporate the software acquisition pathway and then make that the, of course, preferred option going forward? How's that working, and what does it mean for your partners?
Yeah, so that's kind of a multiple response to that question. Because part of the question that you were asking is, how do we transition existing programs? And that can be very challenging depending on how old the system is, the code, where they are in the development cycle. It's has been shown to be easier if we can start fresh or start when there is a new kind of effort going on, because then you can build it in right at the front. It's not that it's not impossible, but it does take some concentrated effort to think, how do we transition from where we are? And that's assuming we're talking about an existing program that's already up and running. Then there's also just an organizational perspective, which then we employ different change management strategies to ensure that we are communicating and building the awareness, kind of like what we're doing here, right? We're building awareness, we're sharing success stories, we're sharing the lessons learned, and then most importantly, we're actually creating a path to actually go do it. And I think that's going to be true regardless where you are in this journey. And it always goes back to, like, why are we transforming? Why are changing? In some cases, it might not be a true transformation. Maybe it's just further adoption of some existing practices you're already doing. And while I think there are some common trends, some best practices for that, or success patterns might be a better word, because they continuously kind of evolve. But I think there's some lessons we can take. And that's where, like when Sean was just talking about these different hybrid approaches, being able to share and learn together as a community of how others have done it is really helpful. And I wanted to mention, because I saw one of the questions in there that's kind of related to this, about hybrid, where you have like a middle tier in a software pathway. I couldn't point to you where, but I do recall on the Defense Acquisition University website, they actually have a write-up or some brief guidance on how you might start putting some of these pathways together, and that hybrid approach. So that's another resource for people as well. So I hate to say that it depends, but it kind of does. And I think getting ahead of the game, a kind of a new acquisition is easier than if you're already, mid-stride.
Makes sense. So this is a transition, not a clean cut and break. We are at time. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to any of the other questions. I want to thank all of the panelists who joined in the conversation today, Eileen, Suzette, and Sean. This has been very informative. I appreciate the opportunity to moderate today, Arun, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Hey, thanks, Trey, for that great session. Thanks to all the panelists for all the information. Thanks, everyone, for their attendance and the great questions. I love the getting down to brass tacks form of the questions and the answers. That was really helpful. We're going to post the recording online, as well as the links to some of the documents that Sean and Eileen and Suzette mentioned. But we'll post that online as soon as possible. If you have feedback about this event, especially topics you'd like to see us cover in the future, please email us at eti@ndia.org. I want to take the opportunity to highlight a few upcoming ETI events and NDIA events. Trey's Cybersecurity division is having a meeting tomorrow. Keynote speaker is Katie Arrington. Also, topics being covered are some of these acquisition reform topics that we talked about today. That's tomorrow, June 4th, 2025. Suzette's Systems Engineering Division is having their 28th Annual Systems and Mission Engineering Conference. That's October 27th to 30th in Tampa, Florida. Please visit NDIA's calendar events for more information on both of these events. Our next Tech 101 webinar will be on June 25th. It's going to be on resilient materials. Also visit NDIA's calendar of events to register. Additionally, ETI's upcoming webinars over the summer, how to steal AI algorithms at the edge and protect them, that's July 8th, and how to be a technology apostle, that's July 18th. And then, of course, I want to announce the August 27th through 29th this summer at the DC Convention Center is our third Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference and Exhibition. We're proud to announce that General Kane, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is going to be one of our keynote speakers. We're working on keynotes, breakout panels, abstract presentations, an exhibit floor, as well as sponsorship opportunities. Please visit ndia.techexpo.org for more information. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today.